I'm Tamara Cook. I'm a Senior Program Manager in the Environment and Development Department. Today I will be joined by Jeff Neal. He is a Senior Program Manager in the Transportation Department. He's going to be kicking off the slides here in just a few minutes. I will be closing out the presentation. After the presentation concludes, we will be offering some remarks from our leadership at COG and the Corps of Engineers. Jerry Cotter is joining us from the Corps of Engineers, the Fort Worth District Office. Edith Marvin, who is the Director of the Environment and Development Department at the Council of Governments, is also on the line, as well as Michael Morris, who is the Director of our Transportation Department at the Council of Governments. They will all be available to provide some high-level remarks regarding the effort that you will hear about today. So to orient you to what we're going to be covering this morning, we have a project overview and just sharing what the goals of this project and this effort are. We want to also provide everyone an update on where we are currently with funding. We have actually been submitting funding applications, most recently one on Monday. To the Texas Water Development Board. We submitted a bridge application, so you'll hear a little bit more about that and what that means for all of the local governments and partners in this particular part of our region. And then we also want to cover stakeholder engagement. We do have a small amount of funds that we will be initiating some stakeholder engagement in the late fall, early winter timeframe. So we want to make sure that everyone's aware of that and what that means to your local government. And then talk a little bit about next steps and kind of the long-term vision for this project. We're estimating a 5-year effort. So we are literally just at the beginning stages of starting work on this project, but want to make sure that everyone is informed going into this effort on what it looks like. And then, as I mentioned, the Corps and COG will be providing remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions for everyone. Okay, so just a short project overview before Jeff takes over the slides. This is a project that was initiated through a partnership with the Corps of Engineers, Jerry, who's on the phone, and the Council of Governments. And it came to fruition maybe about 2 years ago, and we have actively been working on developing partnerships and lots and lots of presentations to different groups, congressional delegations, and all sorts of other conferences and other groups that are interested in the concept. And the project vision really it's a paradigm shift from traditional planning, I would say. What we're hoping to achieve is a comprehensive, proactive, integrated planning process that's looking at transportation, stormwater, and environmental infrastructure before growth happens in the project area that was shown on the first slide. A lot of times, so transportation already is planned in a long-range fashion, 20, 25 years into the future. Stormwater, though, is not, and there's a lot of reactive stormwater planning and development going on. So really, we want to look at how can we integrate those planning processes and have a proactive approach to looking at those together and planning for both at the same time. And then also bringing in the environmental features element and potential benefits, financial benefits from recreational opportunities to water quality and all sorts of other environmental services that could be provided by looking at taking a more holistic approach to environmental mitigation as well. So lots of partners will be involved in this project. Several of them are on the line today, which we appreciate their participation and their support. We have been working with many of those that are on the screen on this slide, like Tarrant Regional Water District, Upper Trinity Regional Water District, TRA, TxDOT, and all sorts of other groups. And of course, our key audience and our key group that we are wanting to do this project for is for our local government members, our cities and our counties and other special districts that are in this particular part of our region. We really want to be able to provide them tools to address the future development and growth that will be happening in this portion of our region. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff so that he can talk about kind of the reasons why we initiated this project and how it got to where it is today.
Very good. Thank you very much, Tamara. I very much appreciate it. Well, good morning, everybody. And appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you today about really a very exciting project. And at the same time, something we think that's very sorely needed because we are clearly seeing enormous impacts from natural disasters happening all over the country, all over the world, and particularly here in the state of Texas, and particularly over these last few years, perhaps most dramatically with the landfall of Hurricane Harvey near the Texas coast. But we've also seen, even in the interior of Texas, significant flooding events to the level that many of us hadn't previously seen. Flooding is very impactful. In fact, in the state of Texas, over a period, 3-year period, 160 of the 224 fatalities that occurred across the state actually happened here. And there's been an increasing cost due to flooding events. And those costs are spread out over a variety of different sectors of the economy, sectors of government. But particularly, we're seeing that appropriations for maintenance, for recovery from these events are continuing to increase because they're occurring much more frequently and are much more severe in its impact. And one of the interesting things that we see is that, at the same time as these impacts have increased, development has continued to proceed. We are the fastest growing state in the country. We have held on to this blistering pace for many years now. And it's particularly interesting when you see just how quickly the urbanized area around Dallas and Fort Worth has spread out. And a lot of planning goes into it already. A lot of planning from transportation, water supply, wastewater, solid waste. All of that, of course, is necessary to be able to accommodate the demands of increased population, new jobs, and everything. But stormwater infrastructure has lagged behind, and in many cases, it's not considered as much of a necessary feature in a lot of these infrastructure plans as it should be. We don't take account for the increases in impervious area that results in all of this new development. The more that you develop homes, buildings, whether commercial, industrial, that's less area for storage of water. In fact, many of the cases across these various developments, there's minimal requirements for those locations to withhold water. And so there's significant impacts to the watershed as a result of that. A lot of us right now are using standards like, what is a 100-year floodplain? Well, as you'll see in a moment, that line that represents what is a 100-year flood constantly changes. It's not stationary. And of course, as a result, when it comes to incorporating environmental features or finding ways to ensure that we're mitigating against environmental impacts, all of this is really happening very piecemeal, as opposed to a way to be able to comprehensively deal with that in an integrated fashion. Because really, floodplains are changing all the time. They change based, of course, on changing weather conditions, but they also change a great deal because of the nature and the capacity of the way water is treated within that particular location. As an area develops from natural ground cover to urbanized development, you lose infiltration, you lose envirotranspiration, meaning not enough, water isn't evaporated as quickly. And because of the impervious cover, whatever water still remains because of that type of cover flows very fast, very uncontrolled across those surfaces. So the extent of a floodplain yesterday is not the way that it exists today. As cities grow up around floodplains, as fill gets brought into a floodplain, as bridges are built, as a whole number of other things are done, the character of that floodplain changes. It's not able to withhold water. It in many cases is developed in such a way that makes more water travel faster downstream. And so as a result of all of that, and particularly in the case of transportation, we've seen that in many cases, water is greatly affecting the quality of transportation, not just in terms of in major events, sometimes even in not so major events. These very critical arteries for economic development and for essential services, for emergency services, end up getting cut off because we're not accounting for the additional needs of stormwater infrastructure. And this becomes, this of course becomes critical when you consider that, because what ends up happening is when we keep transportation and all of these other interests siloed or separated, it ends up resulting in reactive planning. We end up not taking into account the cumulative effects of urbanization. And so as a result, we have still more increase in impervious surfaces, leading to more stream corridor degradation, leading to design that doesn't adequately account for changes happening within the watershed. The fact that as development occurs upstream and water is not withheld as much as it should, significant impacts to folks downstream. We're trying to rely on the best possible data, the greatest, most updated information that we have to build new infrastructure, but yet a lot of it is based off of outdated data. In many cases, you will see that floodplain delineations, 100-year flood, for example, in some cases are still what it was back in the 1970s, back when the Dallas-Fort Worth region was 2.5 million people, as opposed to 7.5 million people. And then obviously, not accounting for all of this has enormous impacts to health and to safety, to the economy. And we rely a great deal, obviously, on increasing the speed and effectiveness of our first responders wherever possible. And it's necessary to have a well-functioning transportation system to be able to do that. So clearly, we need to examine and find ways to enhance this enormous linkage between transportation and stormwater infrastructure. In many cases, transportation in of itself precedes the urban growth that occurs. And so the idea is maybe transportation needs to get out there first, assuring that we're accounting for not only what exists today, but incorporating what could exist in the future. Because in many cases, and I've been involved now in transportation for over 20 years, I work routinely on a number of roadway projects, and you will see that they're accounting for a certain level of a flood event, but only for the land cover and the land use conditions that exist today. But we know that roadways are built to last 30, 40, 50 plus years. And so it's important to take into account what's going to happen in the future, because there is a strong relationship between land use and transportation. This needs really to be a very critical element. We're already doing, as Tamara said, an enormous amount of long-range transportation planning ourselves in the transportation community. So we should be able to allow for the incorporation of that process within a lot of the work that we're already doing. And so this means that we're not just checking off boxes to make sure that the drainage, we're allowing for adequate drainage based on whatever facility is being built for the conditions that are out there today. We're thinking about the future. We're thinking about how vulnerable that new infrastructure may be, or how it may adapt to changing conditions. because right now we have a lot of infrastructure that exists today that doesn't do that. So today, our current surface transportation bill for the nation, it's called the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, the FAST Act, already requires states and metropolitan planning organizations to consider resiliency in the planning process. And when you think about resiliency, you're thinking about it in a number of different ways. You're thinking about the condition and functionality of your assets. You're thinking about the potential risks to its longevity and durability. And you're thinking about how, as a result of those impacts, how well is it going to perform today and in the future? And what are going to be some of the maintenance and preservation treatments, expansion? What are going to be some of the things that are going to be needed as that facility goes through its life cycle? So asset management, risk management, performance management are enormously complementary when you think about resiliency. And so, you know, one of the things that MPOs and states are already doing is setting performance targets on pavements and bridges on our national highway system. And then, of course, a number of communities here in Texas actually own portions of the national highway system. TxDOT does not account for all of the national highway system. And in many cases, a lot of other support or complementary facilities also need a great deal of local, state, and federal attention when it comes to transportation investments. But when you think about the current state of our infrastructure, particularly in our cities, it's a little sobering to think of just how much attention we really need to pay into this. In the city of Dallas, for example, the city council had set a satisfaction rate for all of their pavements back in 2006 at 87%. The idea that at least 87% of all nearly 12,000 lane miles of their pavements were in satisfactory condition or needed to be in that form of condition going forward, and that investments needed to ensure that level of good performance. Well, in November of 2018, the condition rating across those lane miles of pavement was at 77%. Right now, the city of Dallas is spending over $500 million in their current bond program, covering both expansion and maintenance of transportation facilities. By the time they get through that program and have spent over $500 million between 2019 and 2023, the satisfaction rate of those payments are projected to actually fall to 63%. And it's been identified that upwards of $1.7 billion will need to be spent cumulatively over the next 10 years to ensure that that satisfaction rating doesn't fall an additional percentage point. And that's just to maintain a current 63% condition. So obviously it's critical. And we know, of course, that, you know, degradation of our pavements and bridges are not solely due to flooding, but they're also affected by a number of other impacts. But asset management plans provide the foundation to address the strategies needed to make sure that we're meeting these condition targets, but also ensuring that we're accounting for any of the risks, all of the stressors that are causing degradation of our infrastructure, and find a way to deal with all of that at thinking of the life cycle, throughout its life cycle at the lowest practicable cost. And this particular slide demonstrates how Federal Highway Administration has already developed a vulnerability assessment and adaptation framework. And you'll find that it's actually very, very similar to the way that this proposed study is going to be conducted. Because when it comes to our long-range transportation plan, when it comes to the investments that we need to make to support our current population, as well as the growth that's being anticipated, we're spending a great deal of money. We're spending a great deal of investment, time, and resources, not only ensuring that we're maximizing what's out there today, but strategically investing in the various modes of transportation needed to support growth. But in the same way that we want to ensure public involvement throughout this entire process at any stage of development, we believe that at the same time, resiliency and its various forms of management also can be provided. We can use this process to think about what's best for those facilities out there today and what do we need to do better to ensure that infrastructure is functioning as normally as possible tomorrow, because this is the kind of problems that will result. More flooding, more runoff, more damage, more disruption, when we really do have an opportunity here before population growth makes these measures a lot more difficult, a way to better integrate these processes, develop a higher quality of life, a higher service standard for our infrastructure and for all the work that we're doing, and also serving the environment as well as possible. So I think at this point, Tamara, this is where I turn it back over to you to talk more about the project specifically. And I look forward to hearing any comments or questions you have on our proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So yes, this is the project area. Thank you, Jeff, for covering all of that. And I think Jeff did a great job of setting up the reason why we wanted to initiate this project. It is a large area, and we came up with this boundary when we all sat down and started looking at future growth projections and where the urbanized area sort of already ended or was somewhat delineated. So there's a combination here of COG boundaries in the upper northwest portion of our region, a combination of urbanized areas, and then also watersheds. So we did want to stick with the Trinity watershed. So really this is focusing on the upper reaches of the Trinity River Basin and really looking at the proactive planning for all the reasons that Jeff just covered, so that our downstream partners, of course, would also benefit from these efforts, including Fort Worth, Arlington, Dallas, and all of those cities and counties throughout the middle portion of our urbanized area. And there's some interesting statistics about this particular area that we've pulled, just to give some frame of reference. COG forecasts that this particular red area will grow in terms of population by 126% in the next 25 years. That's huge. So lots of new people moving to this part of the region. Of course, that brings lots of good things, economic development, and all sorts of other good benefits to the communities that are in this area and the counties that this would be covering. But there's also a lot of potential impacts that Jeff covered that we really want to look at and plan ahead for, and help our communities plan ahead for those as well and provide tools for them. Another interesting statistic is that just in the last decade or so, this particular area, which is very heavily undeveloped, it's 60% undeveloped still, in the last decade had seen about 20% increase in impervious area. So with the growth of 126% going forward in the next 25 years, that 20% impervious area will just continue to increase. And as Jeff pointed out, when you have more impervious area, you have more stormwater runoff, which leads to additional flooding. So those are some of the elements that we really want to look at, is how is this area going to grow, and how can we incorporate environmental features to accommodate that stormwater runoff before it happens. So there are lots of benefits to a paradigm shift. The one that we're proposing, we think, has many more than what are even on this slide. But just to point out a couple of major benefits that we think this effort will provide our communities and our region is that really, I think Jeff already talked about this, it's dissolving the silos that we typically work in, transportation and environment and floodplain management. Even within a city government, typically those operations and those job titles are in different departments sometimes. For smaller communities, though, it might be different. That person may be everything in the community and doing floodplain management and the long-range planning for the community or for the county. So everyone has a different setup and a different way of addressing all of these different elements that we want to talk about. But from a historically institutional perspective, transportation planning has been done kind of outside of the stormwater planning realm. So we really want to dissolve those silos and work together on this. This effort also complements existing regional programs that we have, such as the Common Vision program that's been around for 30 years in our region, focused on the main stem of the Trinity River and all of the communities that are part of that program. And it also complements existing transportation planning processes that are underway and have been underway for many, many years, decades, to look forward and plan for the growth that our region will have in terms of mobility options and providing transportation to our region. One of the neat things that we think that will come out of this effort, or that we hope we can demonstrate, is positive financial outcomes to our community and our local governments. Jerry Cotter with the Corps of Engineers, you'll hear from him in a minute. He always likes to talk about this study that was done where for every dollar that you invest in stormwater infrastructure and mitigation, there's a return on investment of $5 to $7. So that's huge. That means that everything we can do ahead of time will return a really great benefit in terms of risk reduction, but then also cost reduction and cost effectiveness. And then the last thing that we are really hoping to achieve is development of tools and working together and working collaboratively to develop resources and tools that our local governments can use in their decision-making processes to inform those things that they don't already have that they can use in their floodplain management programs. So just shifting gears to kind of what does this project actually look like and what we're anticipating the major elements will be. There are several major elements, starting with data collection effort, looking at what's out on the ground existing right now in terms of stormwater management structures, land inventories, looking at future transportation plans, future road projects that are going to be talked about and discussed over the next 25 years, or even maybe longer, doing hydrology and hydraulic modeling. So lots of different elements in terms of the data piece that will be developed over the next few years. And then we want to take all of that information and look at how can we use that information to develop plans to offset the impacts that we think may happen from those future plans and development efforts. So those would be things like developing environmental features, regional detention, wetlands, all sorts of other things that could be used to offset those impacts. And then the one thing that I did want to make sure I touch on is the implementation in the last box there. Again, getting back to, we want to provide tools. We don't want to just do all the data collection and put a report out, but we want to provide real tools, web-based tools, maps, model ordinances, model design manuals, whatever it is, that are usable and valuable to our local government members so that they can take those and implement them in their planning processes and their administrative function and really hopefully make better decisions and more informed decisions. So this is kind of getting more specifically to the products and outcomes that we're hoping or anticipating. This is certainly not all inclusive. These are ideas that we have that we will be working through over the next year or two to really refine and define what these look like and what these mean based on input from our local government members in this region. What do they want? What could they use? What do they need? These are things that we have heard or are aware of or already have that as tools available that we would maybe expand on or tweak or integrate. Specifically, we want to look at, of course, transportation infrastructure tools, flood reduction models, as I already talked about, regulatory products, environmental stewardship elements, looking at restoration plans, nature-based green stormwater infrastructure plans for the project area, and then a whole host of other things there in the blue category that look at emergency planning and HAZMAP updates and integrating all of this stuff into the HAZMAP plan, comprehensive planning, open space planning. There's just so much here, but looking at a whole lot of different elements and pulling all of that together into some final products that could be available for free to all of our local government members. And so really what we're looking at with this effort is the analysis piece of things, the data collection, providing the information, and developing policies and actions, recommendations for our local governments so that they can use all of that material to inform their decision-making process. So where are we right now? Just kind of wrapping up here in the next 5 minutes. We are on a long journey. As I stated earlier, we've estimated that this will be about 5 years, or at least 5 years, maybe is the way I should say it. We have a lot of partners that have been collaborating with us already on this concept, and we've made a lot of progress in informing our state and federal partners and congressional leaders as well. Last summer, I mentioned that there was a congressional roundtable where we really had great response to this kind of shifting of the mindset in terms of why aren't we doing this already in terms of the stormwater element. So we feel like we've got a lot of high-level support for this, and we really wanted to bring this to our communities today to provide an update on where we are. And right now we're at the funding stage, and we've been there for a while, but things are moving quickly now as funding is beginning to open up. We did just apply on Monday and submitted an abridged application to the Texas Water Development Board for Category 1 funds that they have available for planning efforts just like this. So we hope that we will be invited to submit a more full application later this year. And then we are hoping to initiate planning work in early calendar year 2021, probably January timeframe realistically. We do have a small pot of funds that we've been able to get secured, hopefully, from FEMA, where we could start some initial engagement activities with our local government members and other partners and stakeholders in the area, like developers and nonprofits and lots of other groups that will have a stake in this project. And then ultimately, when we're done, we're hoping that we can replicate this and provide a model that other regions in Texas, other COGs in Texas, other partners, river authorities, or even around the nation could replicate and develop a process and tools that they could use to either build on or create for themselves based on what we've done here. So this is a little bit different way of looking at the timeline, just going back to 2018, where the concept was developed all the way to Monday when we submitted the abridged application to the Water Board. We've had several major steps along the way. I did mention the July congressional delegation last year where we presented the project concept. Michael and Jerry presented the project concept to a North Texas congressional delegation. That went really well. And then this year we've been really busy. In early 2020, you can see a lot has been happening. Things really picked up steam as the GLO has been issuing their statewide mitigation plan. We provided comments to that. There are going to be pots of funds that we feel like this project will be a great fit for. We've been collaborating with them. We've been collaborating with the Water Board and other funding partners like the Corps of Engineers. We've also submitted a funding request to the Colonel, the Fort Worth District Colonel, earlier this year. So hopefully we will hear back from that, from the Fort Worth District soon on whether or not that funding request will be accepted. This is a specific table looking at all of the current submitted applications that we have in with more specificity for everyone on the amounts of funding that we've been looking for or requesting. I forgot to mention that we think this is about a $10 million project, or at least a $10 million project. So we've got a little bit of a ways to go in terms of having enough funding available to actually complete this project in the fashion that we would really like to do. And then we're anticipating or requesting funds. We're anticipating hopefully some funds from the Regional Transportation Council, and also hopefully from the General Land Office as they begin to open up their CDBG-MIT funds and any other funding categories that they may have available in the future. We don't know when those applications will be released yet, so we will be watching those closely. But as they are opened, we hope to apply for those as well. And then anything else that comes up, FEMA BRIC and transitions that FEMA is going through with some of their funding programs, of course, GLO again, and then TDM as they work with FEMA to administer the BRIC program over the next few years. We're hoping that there may be some additional funding there as well. So what are we asking of our local governments? Well, we will be initiating stakeholder engagement very soon in the next, I would say 5 to 6 months. So you will be hearing more from COG, inviting you to attend meetings, inviting you to attend, hopefully by then, in-person workshops, and starting to engage in data collection efforts and surveys to identify your needs and your products that might be useful for you as you do your work, and then really start looking at kind of the larger project area and collecting data on that sub-regional scale for that very large project area. We also want to come out and do some trainings on specific topics, for example, integrating higher standards into floodplain ordinances, building codes, and flood reduction, flood risk management elements. So lots of things coming in the next, I would say, 6 months that we would like to initiate with our stakeholders. If we get funding before then we would love to initiate this before then, but as of right now, the only funding that we're likely to have in the next 6 months, or that we are aware of right now, is this a small pot of FEMA funds that will allow us to come out and start doing some of this work. And then this is a several-year process, so there will be several phases of engagement over time, as this slide shows. So next steps, just wrapping up here. We are going to apply for project funding, continue to apply for that. As mentioned, we did submit a formal an abridged application to the Water Board. We hope that we will be invited to apply for a full application. I don't know when that will happen, but hopefully over the summertime we would hear more about that. And if so, we do know that there will be some requirements that our local governments that are in the project area will have to provide some endorsement of this project. So we wanted to get out ahead of the need to ask for endorsement and do some education and outreach on the project concept before we come back out, hopefully in support of the Water Board. No financial commitments will be asked, but just endorsement of the project. And then again, General Land Office and GLO as those funds are released, and then any other applications as they become available. And then again, we will be beginning the phase 1 of the engagement activities with the partners, hopefully in January 21, maybe a little bit earlier. We'll see how our funding agreement with FEMA goes for that. And then just keep working on other project areas or efforts, excuse me. We've got a lot of things already happening in this part of our region. The last bullet there talks about several efforts underway. Texas Water Development Board and FEMA both will be initiating base level engineering for the project area, which will be a great foundation to build our project on and integrate and collaborate with those efforts. COG's CTP program actually has several flood risk identification projects either currently underway or that will be happening in the project area over the next year or two. And then the Corps of Engineers is very involved in the informed watershed hydrology assessment. So there's so many things happening already that we feel like we can leverage and expand upon and use information from as we continue to collaborate with all of these other partners. And then hydrology and hydraulics from the Corps of Engineers will be a very early portion of this project overall. We really need to know what the stormwater runoff and what all of that looks like in order to move into better design elements for transportation and better land use decisions and floodplain management decisions and ordinances and those type of things. And defining environmental features, we have to know what volume of water and where the water will be before we can move into some of those decision-making tools that we want to develop. So with that, I am going to wrap up the technical portion of the presentation here and really open it up for any remarks that Jerry Potter with the Corps of Engineers has, or Edith, or Michael with the Council of Governments. All of our contact information is here on the slide, and as I said earlier, the presentation will be posted along with the recording of this presentation on this website that's here on the slide. So Jerry, Edith, Michael, any comments or remarks before we take any questions?
This is Michael. Yeah, the bottom line for me is I think our local governments are the last resort. They're the last voice. They're the last place our citizens go to with regard to issues related to stormwater. And to a large extent, it's unfair to our cities because the residents' concerns, and it could be an accumulation of events over 50 years from all sorts of disciplines, including transportation. With the new, putting the politics of climate change aside for a moment, the facts are clear that the weather is changing, more intense rains operating at slower speeds. So if we didn't do this, the consequences to our local governments would increase tremendously every year over the next 30 years, especially in this part of the region. So we think it's time to tear down these silos. In our presentation to the congressional delegation, the reason we got a congressional delegation presentation is Congress is fed up with paying over and over and over and over and over again the damages of floods. Why don't we spend more time preventing them from occurring? We saw the cost-effective state in the presentation. So because things are going to get worse, because our local governments are the ones that are holding the end of the hand grenade, because we have an opportunity to develop a pilot capability that's never been done before. It's for all those reasons the RTC is committed to be a major player in what it is we're trying to do.
Thank you, Michael. Barry?
Yeah, if you would put slide 13 up. But as Jeff pointed out, we are seeing an increase in flooding nationally and in Texas. We have 38 offices that operate 700 dams across the country. We get together every year here in Arlington. Actually, Edith and Michael host our meeting. And we're hearing in the last 5 years just a significant uptick in the number of weather-related disasters. As you can see on this map, we developed in the 50s through the early 90s 6 flood control reservoirs to protect the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That system cost about $2.5 billion in today's dollars to construct, but it's returned over 100 billion, over 40 to 1 in return. And we expect to see returns of at least 5 to 7, probably greater, on this investment. And while construction of those dams initially was seen as, oh, it's going to take a lot of land, economically, those reservoirs have benefited the area tremendously, and not only flood control, but water supply. Unfortunately, our newer engagements across the state are more in reacting to flooding. In other words, urban development occurs, storms happen, whether it's an increase in severe weather or just a normal storm. And we have to go in those communities and try to fix what has happened. And fixing something reactively, it's a very difficult process. And so this is about being proactive and getting out in front of growth and development. And a lot of this Western Metroplex area is not protected by a core reservoir. There is no core reservoir out in most of this area. So this is going to give us an opportunity to partner with transportation. This is a very unique thing that has not happened across the country. And it's going to allow us to integrate these stormwater features with roadways. Think about, what if a roadway embankment forms your detention structure? That community is no longer, on the hook to maintain a dam. That embankment is part of the roadway construction and maintenance program. And so it just changes the whole narrative. It allows us to look at this completely differently. We, all of us have to do environmental permitting. When I was in the private sector, that's very frustrating when I had to go to the Corps for a permit. There's a lot of unknown, a lot of negotiation of that process. And with this, we'll create environmental features and bank environmental credits so that as these communities create projects, these credits will be available for them. We'll address things like, like the lakes have done, where they brought a significant amount of economy to the area. and open space issues. And this is going to be done as a partnership. And we, are excited to be part of this partnership. We have forwarded on the application that the COG sent us for $3 million. And that went out of our district as our top priority request. That's how important we think this project is. So I think this represents a real change in thinking, trying to get out in front of flooding and be proactive rather than reactive. And we're just excited to be part of this partnership. Thank you.
Tamara, I would just add, our basic mission, we're an agency, nonprofit and local or government by for our local governments. And this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're a regional planning agency. We're supposed to recognize regional opportunities. This is certainly a regional opportunity, and it's going to take an organization that brings our communities together to, have any impact on moving things forward with our communities, and, working with them to help them understand that this is an important issue that we need to address, and it will help them with their flood risk management. It will help the downstream communities, as you mentioned, with their flood risk management and planning into the future. The Corps of Engineers has been helping us for over 30 years with as a technical partner with our floodplain management programs. And so I want to thank Michael for his foresight and vision and partnering with us, and Molly with the Emergency Preparedness Group. They're going to be a key partner in this area as well to help the member governments understand why this needs to be done now, and why the opportunity will be lost if we don't move forward, because we have a unique opportunity and time to not pass additional risk and debt to future generations with getting in front of this growth and planning for it. So I think that would be, I want to leave time for our folks to ask questions, but I really appreciate being part of this effort and hopefully moving forward with it. And I look forward to what we can accomplish. We will need from our members, I forgot to mention that, what do we need from our member governments? We really need them to help us, and support this effort and implement changes to the way that their community will grow using the tools that we plan to develop with this project. So thank you.
Thank you, Edith. I think we've got about a minute left. I would be happy to stay on for anybody that wants to talk over 11 o'clock, as I'm sure our other panelists would as well. Questions in the chat box, but if you do have any, feel free to ask them now. What would we be doing in the future to implement physical wise? Take a stab at saying, I think physically it would be changing the way transportation infrastructure is designed, but also development of environmental features, meaning things like implementing wetlands in the project area, detention ponds, regional detention in the project area, green infrastructure throughout the project area. Those are some examples, but I'll let Jerry and Edith and Michael weigh in as well, and Jeff also.
Tamara, this is Michael. I think at the end of some other presentations that we've done, we have, a dozen or so things. Maybe looking at how to filter water and recharge the aquifers. We may be looking at mechanical devices in our transportation projects where we don't have stagnant box culverts, but other types of technologies to help. I think there's a lot of conversation I want to have with developers. Developers squeeze in every single lot, shoot lots into the area that eventually is flood prone. How to work with a developer to preserve some environmental elements of the development and maximize land prices on the other lots. To do that. How do we move the cost of mechanically? How do we move the cost that local governments have to pay for stormwater improvements and shift them into our transportation projects? That's what Jeff and I want to really have a conversation about. When we build our transportation project, and we're focused not just on transportation level of service, but stormwater, maybe there's elements that we put into our transportation project that actually reduce costs to local governments having to mitigate as a result of other elements. So there's a lot of very physical engineering elements that'll come. You could send to this group other presentations we'll put together to get a feel for that. But I think more importantly, I think we've even begun to totally understand and explore what we may be able to do. I think the purpose of getting with you all is when you tear down silos and think outside traditional thinking, it's amazing what we may all be able to conceive as strategies. Ecotourism could come to this part of the region of environmental stewardship. So I think it's endless. I think the problem might be it's so endless, it's hard to know which element is best for which part of the region.
So Joe, this is Jerry, from our perspective, you're going to get a complete suite of detailed hydrologic models for that area, that study area. And you're going to have existing conditions flows that represent where we are today, plus projected development flows. And hydrology tell you how much rainfall, how the watersheds are going to respond, and then how deep that's going to be. That's a very expensive undertaking. And that will be an initial benefit. But what this project is about is developing planning level plans of actual stormwater infrastructure that you can have, that you could implement, as well as recommendations on policy and this sort of thing. And then we provided congressional representatives language for the next WRDA bill, and they're telling us they're going to put into the next WRDA bill grants so that the communities here can apply for funding to construct some of this infrastructure. But this isn't any kind of dictatorial thing. It is planning level stormwater infrastructure that you can implement if you choose. And then we want to find ways, funding wise, to help you guys implement that and be better prepared and more resilient. And all that data, we have some flood warning systems that we're developing, and that data can be rolled into that for the emergency management community. There's just so many opportunities. And like Michael said, environmental features woven into these stormwater features so that we get credits for, wetland type banking, prairie banking, that we can use as offsets when we are building some sort of infrastructure. And the possibility is to just go on. And I think that's why it's so important for y'all to engage so that you can tell us, what else should we be looking at? Over.
And Joe, I would just add as a final comment on that, one of the things that we hear from our member governments, our cities and our counties in the more rural areas is that they just don't have the information. They don't know where the water is. And so if we provide, we do this study, we find areas where we can, mitigate the increased runoff coming down, but we also provide GIS layers that our communities can use to include, here's where the extent of the water is, here's where the spread is. And you could implement that such that you could extract those GIS layers and put them on your commercial development site plans or your residential subdivision plats, or you can use it, on any of the drawings that your consultants that are developing use to communicate what their intent is to your councils and your commissioners courts. So with that additional information, it will be much easier to not put infrastructure in harm's way and make better decisions based on real data. So that would be my take too.
If you've got any questions, please feel free to reach out to anyone on the screen and we'd be happy to talk about this project. We're excited about it.
We hope for and appreciate your support. Thank you to our communities and member governments.
Definitely. Thank you all for participating today in the webinar, and we will be in touch very soon. Thank you so much for your support.
Certainly. We look forward to working with you.
All right, we are concluding this webinar. Thank you.